Hi everyone, I'm State Representative Laura Devlin. I have the privilege of representing the 134th District of Fairfield and Trumbull. I'm also the House Ranking Member on the Transportation Committee, and I'm here with my good friend, Senator Henry Martin.
Hi, Laura.
Hey.
I'm State Senator Henry Martin, and I represent the 31st District, which is made up of Bristol, Plainville, Harwinton, Thomaston, and Plymouth. And I also am the ranking member representing the Senate.
So Senator Martin and I have been traveling the state hosting informational toll forums to share some information about various proposals that are on the table to help people be more informed. And in case you haven't been able to attend one, we wanted to share this presentation with you here tonight. So what our goals are for this evening are a few. First, we want to provide a little bit of background about transportation funding. There's a lot of questions about where the money comes from, where the money goes. We also want to build an understanding about tolls. We had 3 bills pass the Transportation Committee, so we'll talk a little bit about what those mean. We also have an alternative to tolls, and Senator Martin will take us through that. So we'll start first with a little bit of background about the Special Transportation Fund. Essentially, the Special Transportation Fund was formally created in 1984 after the Mianus River Bridge collapse, and Governor O'Neill had a 10-year transportation infrastructure renewal program. And that was funded with an agreed 7-time increase over 7 years in the gas tax. It was going to go from 14 cents to 21 cents over that time period. So with a dedicated revenue stream and with a solid plan for infrastructure investment, we were able to get really good rates on the bonding, which was the intention of the Special Transportation Fund to begin with. But shortly thereafter, the general fund started to fall into deficit and the Special Transportation Fund was doing really well. So the decision was made to move all operating expenses for the Department of Transportation over from the general fund to the Special Transportation Fund. And this continued again. The general fund was falling into deficit, so then the decision was made that all pension and fringe benefit costs for the Department of Transportation employees would move from the general fund over to the Special Transportation Fund. This happened again with the Department of Motor Vehicles, and it was at this point that sort of alarms went off that with all of these moves of expenses out of the general fund to the Special Transportation Fund, it was putting the Special Transportation Fund in jeopardy, and that it wouldn't be able to fund the projects that it needed to. So gas taxes started to increase beyond the agreed amount. In fact, they went up to about 39 cents a gallon. But expenses continued to be moved in with the Department of Public Safety Highway Patrol moved over. That was subsequently moved back, but there's been an ongoing trend of basically moving any expense related to transportation to be covered by the Special Transportation Fund, but not necessarily every revenue source. So let's take a look at where the money does come from for the Special Transportation Fund. And there are some misunderstandings that it is purely the gas tax and that the gas tax is fading away. So the big chunk, the big blue chunk on this pie chart is about $500 million, and that is the fuel tax. That's the 25-cent tax at the pump that we pay. The red chunk is the petroleum gross excise tax. That is a wholesale tax at about 8.1% paid at the wholesale level. So we do also pay for that at the pump along with the 25 cents. The green chunk is the sales and use tax, and that includes what was included in the bipartisan budget, a transfer of the new car sales tax that Governor Lamont has frozen going forward. And then you can see there's various licensing and fees and things like that, that based on the Office of Fiscal Analysis was revenues of $1.7 billion at the beginning of the year. So where does all the money go? What isn't understood is that the funds in the Special Transportation Fund really aren't for check writing of projects. So the big green chunk that you see there is the Department of Transportation. In fairness, about half of that is subsidies for buses and railways, and the rest are operating expenses for the department. The red chunk is the Department of Motor Vehicles, And the blue chunk is what is used to back bonding or STO bonds for transportation. And you can see some other expenses that are in there as well. So transportation projects, besides a little bit of pay to go, which is about $13 million, are largely exclusively funded by bonding and matching federal funds. So are tolls the answer for the state of Connecticut? There's a lot of different questions about what different things could look like and what might make sense. So let's look at some different tolling options. One of those would be to just put tolls on the border. And it's not, it's unconstitutional because of interfering with interstate commerce. So border only tolls are not an option for us. So then we thought, well, all right, how about out-of-state cars only? The governor's doing a great job of creating the common enemy of the out-of-state driver, so maybe we could just get them. But for the same reasons we're not able to do border tolls only, we cannot just do out-of-state cars. So then there is the truck-only option, and this is what Governor Lamont had campaigned on and what is in place in Rhode Island. However, for two reasons. One, it wouldn't generate the revenues that the state is looking for out of tolling, probably at the outside mark, about $300 million. And the state of Rhode Island has been in litigation with truckers. And while there was a decision made at a superior court level that because tolls are a tax, they had to push that decision to a state level. So the jurisdiction has changed, and that litigation is still a little bit up in the air. And that leaves us with cars and trucks as an option. And if Connecticut was to move forward, if we were to have legislative approval, if the governor was to approve, and if we had a plan that was approved by the federal government, the option for Connecticut would be congestion-only tolling or congestion pricing. So you might wonder, well, what does that mean? What's congestion pricing? So we'll look at that too. Congestion pricing, in essence, is to encourage off-peak travel, to get people off the roads basically during rush hour. And to do that also by reducing discretionary trips. So it might be having a doctor's appointment or visiting a friend or a family member, or going out, meeting for a meal or something of that effect, to try to schedule those in other times of the day or evening. And to also divert commuters to other routes. So it might be to take a bus or to take a train or ride a bike, but to get off the highway. And we do this, or the congestion pricing is done by implementing higher toll rates during peak hours. And those peak hours are from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. So really the hours when people are trying to get to and from work. So out of this tolling in the state of Connecticut, what's currently being looked at is the total revenue goal. And this was from the study that was released in November of 2018. A total revenue target of $1.086 billion. And what's interesting is regardless of the proposals that have come forth, that big number stays the same. And how do we get that number? 60%. So we've heard different numbers, and there was a study completed in 2015 for tolling in Connecticut, and that showed out-of-state drivers would pay between 25 and 30%, and the rest would be paid by Connecticut residents. And there was some pushback on that. So the study that was out in November showed 40% out-of-state, 60% in-state. And then when he announced that he was looking at cars and trucks, Governor Lamont was talking about a 50-50 percentage breakup. So we're using 60-40, 60% of our tolling paid by Connecticut residents. That's $645 million out of our pockets. Now, if we say, okay, but in the state of Connecticut, we pay by ourselves that full $500 million of gas tax that I showed you earlier, then that means with the $645 million in tolling plus the $500 million in gas tax, Connecticut residents will be paying $1.145 billion out of our pockets. And that doesn't even include that 8.1% that I had shared with you. So what are these tolling plans? Now, in November, in the study, this is a map that was shared at that time. And there's been a lot of controversy about this map, but I do want to explain this to you and just highlight a few things. It was done very thoughtfully, and it was developed with a lot of rigor. So the reason that you see so many red dots, and each red dot is a gantry, and they are spaced about 6 miles apart from each other. And they are spread across this way to get the most out-of-state traffic that we can, the most out-of-state cars, to be able to spread the tolling rate sort of evenly around the state, so not one corridor in the state might be hurt more or pay more than other parts of the state. And if you have so many tolls, you can kind of keep the rate lower. In addition, what was identified as a goal was mitigating diversion to back roads. But I have to tell you, at least in the Fairfield County corridor, where on I-95 and on the Merritt Parkway, exits are 1 mile apart, with tolling every 6 miles, that's going to create a huge diversion to the back roads. So Governor Lamont came back with a plan, no, we're just going to do 53 gantries, not 83. And so this is what Governor Lamont's plan would look like. Tolling every 6 miles on I-84, 95, 91, and on the Merritt Parkway. So I mentioned we had 3 bills in the Transportation Committee. There was the Senate Democrats bill, and there was the governor's bill, and there was also the House Democrats bill. All 3 of those included this 53 gantry scenario. But the House Democrats bill also gave the Department of Transportation commissioner the ability that if he deemed it necessary, that in fact we could put tolls on any limited access highway, which brings us back to this 82, 83 gantry map. So there is no solid plan at this point. Everything is very fluid, but I've never known a toll to go down or very rarely to be taken away like we have had done in the state of Connecticut. So we hear, okay, every other state has tolls. So what this would look like for the state of Connecticut is shown here. And we would be the most densely tolled state in the entire nation. And if we were to go with the governor's plan of 53 toll gantries, we would be ranked 7th in the nation for total miles tolled. And if we were to go with the 82 or 83 gantry plan, we'd be 4th in the nation. So how would this all work? Let's look at some cost and kind of payment categories. It would go a couple of different ways, and you can see some average costs up here. So one is you could have an Easy Pass vehicle. So you could get a Connecticut Easy Pass, just like you might have an Easy Pass for New York or for Massachusetts. They're not restricted to people living in Connecticut. Anybody can get a Connecticut Easy Pass if they're traveling through our state. And that would provide about a 30% discount off of what would be considered a standard rate. And if you are a regular commuter in the state of Connecticut, so you've taken the same route every day, 5 days a week, you could potentially get another 20% discount. But you kind of have to ask discount off of what? Because regardless of the number of discounts or the rate, and regardless of the number of gantries, the $1 billion number stays the same. So you could also not have an Easy Pass, and your options there are twofold. One is you just have an unregistered car, so as you would go through tolls at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter, however it's worked out, you would get a bill in the mail, and then you would have to pay that bill. And Connecticut would enforce that by, if you had bills outstanding, you wouldn't get a registration renewal or some other things. Now, if you didn't want to have an Easy Pass and you wanted to register your vehicle, you could also do that, and then you could essentially give the DMV access to your bank account, and on a monthly basis they would just withdraw the money from your account to cover the amount of your tolls. So if we were looking at what this would actually cost out of pocket from various parts of the state, if you were to travel from Norwalk to Hartford on a regular basis, it's a little over $1,800 a year. And if we were to go from Waterbury to Hartford, it's about $825 a year. And Danbury would be about $1,600 a year. And that's using the proposed Connecticut 30% discount, so of an Easy Pass rate. But there's a better alternative, and Senator Martin is here to talk to you about what that is.
Thanks, Laura. We do have a plan, and it's called Prioritizing Progress, and it began in 2015 and put together by the Republican caucus. The goal that we had in mind when we put Prioritize and Progress together was to stabilize the transportation funding without adding a tax burden to the people of Connecticut. When Laura and I arrived at the Capitol, we were assigned to the Transportation Committee, and we got to meet the commissioner of the Department of Transportation. His name was James Redeker, and he said this: for 121 years, we at the Department of Transportation have planned improvements based on money that we think will be available from revenue streams, and therefore we are always struggling to have barely functioning transportation systems. Simply what he was saying was that he was basically doing patchwork on our roads, our bridges, and our railways, and just doing the minimum of maintenance. And he really wasn't able to enhance our transportation system without additional funding. So what are the needs? Well, we were told back in 2015 by the department that they needed $62 billion over a 30-year period. And within a month or so, Governor Malloy said that he needed, under his Let's Go Connecticut plan, he needed $100 billion over a 30-year period. We found that a little conflicting. And actually, he didn't even have a plan in place of how he was going to fund that vision that he had. So currently, there is funding available, and this is what it looks like. We do borrow for long-term capital projects, and we use the special tax obligation bonds. They're called the STOs. We borrow about $750 million a year. In addition to that, we receive federal funding, and we receive about $732 million a year. When you add the two of them up together over a 30-year period, it's $45 billion. It's a little short of the $62 billion that the Department of Transportation needs. Let me talk to you a little bit about the Special Transportation Fund. It's also known as the lockbox. And there are two components of the STF, the lockbox, and that is the following. Laura explained to you the operating side, and I just explained to you the capital side. That is the money that we use to repair the roads, the bridges, and our railways. So we know that the $1.5 billion is not enough on an annual basis to do the upgrades that we need. And we asked ourselves, gee, what other resources do we have that we could tap into? And this is where led us to Prioritize and Progress. The plan includes utilizing another part of our bonding aspect of our government. Similar to the STF, where there are two components, bonding for government is also made up of two. One is the STO for the roads, bridges, and our railways, but there are other assets that we have in government that we need to bond for long-term capital improvements. And this is where we utilize the GO, or general obligation bonds. There's also a cap that we are going to adhere to, and that was developed in the bipartisan budget, and we all agreed to that we are going to hold bonding to no more than $2 billion a year. We said to ourselves we're going to take care of the core investments that we have, and the difference we would use to fund the transportation. In 2011, the previous administration began with a bonding level of about $1.4 billion. In a short amount of time, it literally almost doubled to $2.7 billion in 2016. Through the bipartisan budget, we reduced that 2.7 down to a very manageable level and accepted by both sides of the aisle to $2.0 billion on an annual basis. And that's where we begin with Prioritize and Progress, with the GO bond allocation. We begin with $2.0 billion, and we make sure to bond, or we make sure to take care of the core investments that we have here in the state of Connecticut. We got rid of all the pet projects, we got rid of the political handouts, and then we gave the assets somewhat of a trim. As an example, school construction is one of the assets that we bond for on an annual basis. That in the past was about $575 million, and we gave it a haircut to about $500 million. And we did the same with the other assets, such as UConn Health, UConn University, clean water. We provided funding for housing, crumbling foundations, small town economic assistance program, LoCEP for the larger communities, and all these other assets that we have, to a totaling to about $1.3 billion. The difference is $700 million that we would provide to the Transportation Department for their needs. So when you stack these things up, this is what it looks like. The STO equals $750 million, federal funding $732 million, the GO bonds $700 million, totaling to about $2.2 billion. And over a 30-year period, it's $65 billion, meeting the needs of the Department of Transportation. And why does Prioritizing Progress work? Because it provides the transportation funding needed with using the current resources that we have in our state. In essence, we're living within our needs. We use bonding responsibly for long-term transportation capital improvements. We maintain current use of $250 million GO bonds. Let me explain this shortly or simply, is that this plan is being used currently through the bipartisan budget. We wanted $700 million on an annual basis, but negotiations are negotiations. And we put into the budget a $250 million on GO bonds. So the plan is in part currently being used. It stays within the bonding cap. It requires no tolls, everyone. And it guarantees a steady, predictable flow of money for transportation infrastructure, meeting the needs of the Department of Transportation over a 30-year period, providing $65 billion. And that is Prioritizing Progress.
So we have thrown a lot at you, but we hope at the end of this you agree with us there is a positive alternative to tolls, and that's Prioritize Progress. So what can you do? This is the chance to let your voice be heard, to take this on a different path. So you can contact your representatives and your senators. We encourage you to do that. Contact the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate. Call the governor. Let them know your point of view. You can write letters to the editor through our websites and social media. You can sign up for toll alerts. And there's also a great grassroots organization, No Toll CT, who have garnered almost 100,000 signatures on a petition, are holding anti-toll rallies across the state, and it's a great way for you to get involved as well. So we hope we can count on your help, and thanks for sticking with us.